Welcome to another episode of Adventures in Fly Tying on FlyFishOhio.com. I'm your host, Joe Cornwall. Today we're joining you from the Cincinnati Fly Fishing Expo hosted by the Buckeye United Fly Fishers. Got all kinds of guys around us very interested in fly fishing, fly tying. Really, this is a great time of the year to come out and enjoy these shows, and we have a very interesting pattern for you today. Take a look at this fly. This is called the Perkioman Muddler. Perkiomen River is a small creek that flows just northwest of downtown Philadelphia, actually not too far away from Valley Forge, and it is loaded with smallmouth bass and carp and rock bass. Wonderful little creek, but it's like so many of the creeks that we find around here. Freestone creeks, rubble bottom, lots of wild smallmouth bass. This version of the Muddler Minnow was created specifically on the Perkiomen. Wonderful little pattern. What makes it unique is this. It uses a body material which is made up of a mylar tube. The tail and the head are both made out of deer body hair. Now what you see that might look a little different on this deer body hair is this is bleached. How do you bleach deer body hair? Well, this is what I did. I went to the local drugstore and I got the same kind of bleach that you'd use to bleach your hair, which is a 20% hydrogen peroxide. Put the deer body hair in a 20% hydrogen peroxide for about 2 hours. It takes a long time, and it'll turn this kind of a yellowish straw color, which is wonderful. Rinse it off, and you can bleach it. You can go, of course, and buy whatever color deer hair you want, but the original was a light color of deer hair. The deer body hair is used for the tail, for the wing, and for the spun head. So this is a spun deer hair fly. Let's get started. We're going to tie this on a size 2 Mustad 3366 bass hook. So that's a pretty standard hook. You could use a slightly longer shank if you wanted to. There's no law against it. I do, however, recommend that you use a ring eye hook. Now today I am using a gel spun thread. This is a GX2 gel spun thread that has a very high breaking tension. You could use also a Flymaster Plus or something along those lines. Keep in mind that not only does this have a tremendous amount of strength, but it's very slippery. So when I tie this on the shank, I am using a lot of pressure. That's why I'm holding that hook shank to make sure that this fly doesn't spin when I get this tied, because this gel spun is just like a braid used on a spinning reel. It's a super braid, very high, and it's also made out of a PE material or a Teflon material, tough to cut. But once it's on there, it's never coming apart. Now the interesting thing about this pattern, let's start by tying in the tail. We're going to clip out some of this deer body hair material. We're going to clip out a piece about the size of, I guess, about a lead pencil. I'm going to take my comb. I'm going to comb out that material that's underneath it, take out all of that lower body hair. So we're going to take all that material out, clean that up pretty good. Now, we want this to be the tail, so that's where we want to tie this in. If that's where we're going to tie this in, we want that body to fill out the mylar tube. We want it to end right about there, so that's where I'm going to cut it. Take that out of the frame so that ends up on the floor. We're going to tie that in. Now, one of the things that I am going to do is I'm going to use a loose wrap when I put that on. I'm going to spiral forward in loose wraps until I get to the front. Then I'm going to torque that down. Now, why did I do that? Because I don't want this to flare in the back. I want this to be a nice piece of material that will not flare in the tail, come all the way back, and then we'll tighten that down a little bit. Now I've already cut a piece of the mylar tubing that's going to be the body. I'm going to take that center section out, discard that, slide that tube over that deer hair, and you see how that fills that out just beautifully right there? Now I want to get it back just far enough so that's going to add a little bit of kind of fuzz to the back of that. Come back to the outside with your thread. Now on the original, this was done with red thread, but because I wanted to use the gel spun for spinning the deer hair, I'm going to go ahead and use the same exact material. I'm going to throw a whip finish onto that. And that's just to hold the back of that material on. Tighten that down. Maybe hit that with a little bit of Sally Hansen's back there, just to make sure that that's kind of cinched down. Just a little drop of the Sally Hansen's, let that work its way in there. I'm going to trim off the extra material I have from the tubing. I don't want to trim it too tight to the body because I need to make sure I have plenty of room to spin that deer hair ahead, but I don't want this to be too long. Now what you will find is this is not a fast fly to tie, simply because it's got a couple of stages and we are spinning deer hair, but it's a very simple fly to tie and it's an incredibly effective fly. This actually imitates small stone roller minnow, a shiner, any of a number of small bait fish. It's also just a plain generic topwater type popper. You see I've caught the front end of that tubing underneath that thread, and I'm going to go back nice and tight so I have this compact body. Now I'm ready for the wing and for the spun deer hair head. I love to spin deer hair. It's a lot of fun. It's a little messy, but it's a lot of fun. I'm going to cut off another piece of this deer hair, about the thickness of a lead pencil, as you can see right there. Okay? That's about what I want. Pull that by the tips. Once again, I'm going to clean that with my comb. Get that so that it's the right length. Now I want this wing, if you will, to come back to about where the tail is, so that's my tie-in point. But here's what I want to do. I don't want this to flare, so I'm going to cut that off just in front of it. Now I'm going to capture this on the top with 2 loose wraps. I haven't pulled down yet. Now I don't want this to spin, I want it to stay on the back, so if I pull down and lock that in, you're going to see that that wing stands right up. It forms almost like the collar if I was tying a Dalberg diver, but it's a lot longer than that collar would be, and that gives me that wing and veiling that you can see over the top. I still have the minnow body underneath, and that makes that kind of nice. Now this is interesting because even though it is a muddler minnow, the head is tied in such a way that it ends up cylindrical, almost like a popper, almost like if you took a metal tube and cut a punch out of a piece of material. That's what it's going to be. So in order to make that head, I'm going to take another piece of that deer hair, clear that out using my comb. But when I spin deer hair, I don't want to use these tips. They don't spin. So now I'm going to take that material and take all those fine tips. I'm going to cut all of those off. So I have my material nicely squared, ready to go, and it's ready to be spun. Now watch, I'm going to hold that so that it's diagonal across the shank of the hook. I'm going to come up with 1, 2, 3 wraps of thread around the center of that, pull tight, and let that just go right around, and that will spin right around the hook and flare out, and I'm ready to go in and tie on my second bunch of deer hair. I want to pack this right up until the eye. So let's do that again. Take a hunk of deer hair that you see here. Use my hair comb, clean out all that material, because that will actually keep your fly from floating and flaring properly. You really want to clean that deer hair out. Now when you do this at home, you can affix this to your desk to make it a little bit easier. No matter how you look at it, this is going to be a lot of mess when you start tying deer hair, but what fun. Clip off those wonderful tapered points and blunt it. So I have, once again, a tube about half the thickness of a lead pencil. Lay that across, a couple of wraps of thread around that, let that go. Watch how that just spins right around there, okay? So now we have a nice beginning of that body. I want to take a hair packer. You can use your thumbnail. If you do, be really careful, because your thumb's going to go run right up onto the point of that hook. You're going to holler and you're going to say words that are going to embarrass you in front of your wife and kids. We're going to get that nicely packed because I do want this to float. So there we go. We've got a nicely packed head right there. Maybe just a little bit more hair on there. We'll use a little bit less this time. Same thing. Clean that out. Trim both ends of it. This time we're going to get in there. Couple of wraps, spin that right around, beautiful. There you go. And you see how that deer hair just kind of stacks in there. Use my hair stacker to push that back. Pack that in tight. Now I'm not going to do, this is not like a bass bug where I'm going to be carving this into a complex shape, but I still want this head to be nicely packed because this is a floating bug. You know, the original muddler minnow tied by Dan Gapin was designed to be an imitation of a sculpin. It was designed to sink, and the way to tie that fly is to make sure that you use the deer hair and tie it loosely. But when we go to the top water, we want to tie it more tightly because it's all that air in the hair that causes that to fly. Now, the thing about this particular gel spun thread is it's really hard, number one, to do a whip finish inside of a fly like this. So I'm going to use a half-inch tool. You can use the end of a ballpoint pen. Just take the center of the pen out. I'm going to use a half-inch tool, put that over the top. I wrap it around the half-inch tool twice. That is a two-turn whip finish. Pull that really tight. Do it again. Two-turn whip finish. I'm going to wrap that one more time. Two-turn whip finish. I got news for you. That's not coming apart. That's just not coming apart. Now I can take my razor blade, eliminate that little bit of material that's right there, or that thread. Now comes the trimming. I'm going to try and do this on the vise to make this a little bit easier for us while we're filming. Let me take this out and rest my hand up on the vise here. So what I want to do is I want to protect the wing by holding that back. You see that I'm kind of moving all this out. Now, to make this into a tubular or cylindrical head, I'm going to take this double-edged razor blade. If you're doing this at home, this is a disclaimer. These are sharp, they will cut you. Don't call me and tell me you cut yourself if you're using a double-edged razor blade, okay? But we're going to use that and we're going to bend that so that we have a semicircle. We're going to push straight back, stopping before we get to our fingers and cut our fingers off. If you go too far, you'll see red, and you'll know you went too far. Do the same thing on the bottom of this. We can invert that hook, bring that through. And you see that what's happening is I'm roughing out a cylindrical body. Now, let me put this back in the vise just to make this a little bit easier to film. Normally I would hold this down where I can see it. We're going to take this razor blade. We're going to start carving away since we've got the start of the body. Go slow, outside in. What you're going to find is the razor blade is much better than scissors for this. You can use curved scissors, but the razor blade really does allow you. And by the way, you get about 2 flies per razor blade, 1 per side. So don't try and use the same razor blade for a long time. They're inexpensive. Buy a couple packs. You're going to get a nice cylindrical head because that makes this into the popper that it is. Now I'm going to take my scissors. I'm just going to square this up. I mean, I can fish that fly right now, but I don't want to be seen fishing an ugly fly, even though I tie God knows how many ugly flies. Well, we want to make it as pretty as we can. We're going to tie that cylindrically. Go ahead and clip this around. Just make it about as pretty as you want to make it. I could sit here all day just trimming away at this, making it perfect. We're not going to do that today. That nice and squared off because that's the way the Perkiomen Muddler was tied. And there you have it, the Perkiomen Muddler tied with a cylindrical head of spun deer hair. The deer hair, once again, that I'm using is a bleached deer hair that I bleached using a 20% hydrogen peroxide solution. See that? Kind of bleached, looks pretty cool, doesn't it? Very simple fly, just 2 materials. Perkiomen Muddler, designed for smallmouth. Fly Fish Ohio, we fish for smallmouth. You gotta have this pattern. Thanks for joining us on Adventures in Fly Tying. Until next time, tight lines.